Hello! Just recently I flew some old stuff. I flew my 10-year-old tricopter and my almost as old ZMR250 and had quite a fun time out in the field. But as I mentioned at the time, I wanted to go back and do a little bit more experiment with the original KK board. I thought I'd never flown a quad on it. I had at one point installed it on my original fiberglass mini quad, but only for like a day before I got a KK2 on there. And I was interested to see if my knowledge of flying now, which is hopefully increased, leads me to have a better experience on this than before. So I've been hunting around looking for bits and pieces to put together, which is very much in the mould of what was available sort of 10 years ago. So I want to take you through that gear and why I'm choosing that and what the sort of choices were around that time and sort of why this sort of thing's relevant, like why was this board such a revolution at the time. So join me down in close up and let's start. Okay, let's start off a bit of history on the KK board. This was developed by Rolf Bach, Captain Cook, as he was called on RC groups, and he basically came up with the original wiring idea for this. So when people first started making it, it was a case of making your own circuit boards and putting your own gyros on and things like that, and making it just from bits. So these were eventually produced by the likes of Hobby King and other people. And you're probably wondering, like, what happened to it? Because the KK obviously became the KK2, and this had buttons to do, things like that, and that was a 2.1 version. But as I understand it, Hobby King, or allegedly, screwed Rolf out of some royalties or something wasn't happening, and then he was no longer invested in development of it. So without him on board, Hobby King really didn't do anything with this. Now there were other boards available, not quite so early. Multi-Wii came along a little bit later, and Multi-Wii ultimately got converted to base flight on different types of hardware, and that became clean flight into Betaflight, etc, etc. There were also other things that came along. Other people mentioned about flying with CC3D. Before you had that, you had the original Open Pilot board, which was the hardest things to get in the world. So this is not the CC3D, this is the one that came before it, and this was a revolution because it had like a computer configurator and stuff. I've never actually used it. I acquired this much later on because at the time not possible to get. But anyway, that is going to be my flight controller. I think I'm going to have to go ahead and flash it using these pins here to get the right firmware on it, and then it's a case of connecting up my motors, connecting in my RC controls here, and then you'll notice, as I said before, these are the gains for roll, pitch and yaw. But in certain situations, if you turned like one of these all the way down and then restarted it and then turn it back up again, that would do things like reverse your channel or something like that. So I'm going to have to check out, oh, it goes diagonally as well, I forgot about that. I'm going to have to check out, see if I can still find documentation for this about how to do it and how to flash it. But that's the guts, the brain, if you like, of the operation. Frame wise, I found this big guy. This is this thing, and it basically goes here, so the camera's this end, arms here, and there's like space in between. To go with that, we have these legs. The reason I'm using this one is because this type of 450 frame was absolutely ubiquitous at the time with quads. The reason we're not flying mini quads back then is mainly because everything was big. You couldn't get sort of small, powerful motors the way you could now. Everything was built around a much bigger sort of basis. And because we could only talk in PWM, which is very slow, we kind of needed the sort of size of things to dampen things out. If you tried flying PWM on something very small, the vibrations escalate. On this, it's kind of a little bit slower and wobblier. I say wobblier, slower and more sort of fudgy, if you like. So these were based on the very famous DJI F450. And F550 had these types of legs, and again, that quad was everywhere. When I went to my first FPV meet, the amount of people who had that along with a NASA controller was just everybody had them, and the NASA was light years ahead of everything else. Back in the day when I wouldn't have called DJI so evil and more hobby based. I found the standoffs to go with them. They weren't worried about weight back then, all metal. As mentioned before, we have this, one of the very early all-in-one ESCs. Otherwise, you'd have the ESCs on the arms, which, again, that was the case with the NASA type quads. They had 30 amp opto ESCs. This one, fortunately, has a BEC to power stuff because I need to power this from the back. There's nothing to put like VCC in. You have to power this on 5 volts coming in. So we've got this. I'm not quite sure what the motor order is for KK. As you see here, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. I suppose you could change it around to the 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not sure which order it is. I'll have to check that, but you know, I can wire these up anyway. These have bullets on. Nobody uses bullets anymore. And these go hand in hand with these motors. Now, I actually bought a lot of this to go together, and I called it El Cheapo because these were cheap even at the time. And these motors were so badly balanced. You see I've got bits of tape on them to try and make them run a bit smoother. So I'm not expecting great things, but it should at least be easy to build. Those are the motors. And I wasn't sure what I was flying this for. I looked in my store and I found these 8045 props from GemFan, very flexible. I thought I was flying this with 9 or 10 inch, I'm not sure. We can try these out. I've got a couple of options. I found a bunch of power distribution boards, not sure if I need one or not. Again, back in the day, because we were pretty much bringing ESC power in all in one and then connecting them up. We had to have these. Of course, I'm using an all-in-one ESC board in this one, so I shouldn't need it, but I've got regulators in this one that can put out 5 volts and 12 volts, so I might need that. Now, what about control? I thought it might be fun to go back to an earlier radio. This is the Turnigy 9X, and it's what I started flying with. For a little while I had a borrowed 40 megahertz radio from a friend at work, but I actually got a sort of cheapo FlySky thing, and then I was waiting ages for this to come in stock. So this is Turnigy 9X. I used to have, and flew it for quite a while with the original firmware. This has been highly modified using ER9X, which is what came before OpenTX. And I've put in something called the Smarty Parts board, which allows me to plug in USB and update the firmware. And there's a backlit screen. And on this one, because normally I'd be using this. This was what came in it. And the reason it's so badly attached here is this antenna was sort of in the top there, was screwed in, and the sort of module was in the back, but it wouldn't really come out because there's a wire going through. So I took this out, and this is on the FlySky system. But because it didn't have any telemetry and I ran out of range, and what would happen is the quad would just fall out of the sky, I upgraded pretty early to this guy. This is a FreeSky DJT, which meant you could run the D8 receivers, and they had telemetry. So I would have been originally running with one of these guys. This is an 8-channel Turnigy or FlySky receiver, but I'm going to go ahead and make it a little bit easier for myself, and I'm going to run this D8 R2 Plus because it has telemetry. Now telemetry, although there's, you know, you could plug things in and get telemetry back in a way, essentially what this module will do is beep if the signal starts dropping. So 1 beep is a bit bad, 2 beeps is like, oh, it's getting there, 3 beeps is like, you're in serious trouble. These extended antennas I used on fixed wing, so I've got some short ones I'll put in there, and I'll be using that one. So VTX wise, last time I showed you this guy with my original Fat Sharks, which feels like my eyes are being gouged out. Originally I could not afford these. These were about £70 in the UK over 10 years ago, which is pretty expensive. So instead of going straight for these, I plumped for the cheaper option, and that was a thing called Boss Cam. So this was a 600 milliwatt, but it worked with the internal receiver in the goggles. And this was the Boss Cam 200 milliwatt VTX. This used SMA, this used RP SMA, and the wiring on them is backwards. Helpfully, you'll see for the power cable, don't try and share it, because you'll notice ground and power is mixed, and I can't remember what the wiring is there. Both of these as well, if you're wondering what channels they worked on, yes, this worked on F, I think this works on E, but to change the channel you had these tiny little dip switches down there, which are actually heat shrinked in, so you had to punch you through the heat shrink to change the dip switches, and it is the same situation on there. They're under there, and I've never touched them on this one. So if I couldn't use my goggles, back in the day I had this external receiver, and I basically cut a piece of wood and mounted it on the tripod. I had a basically cut a piece of shelf off, mounted this up, and then had an AV out connected to my goggles in that way. So fortunately, my up-to-date Fat Sharks with the rapid fire module should be able to pick up what we got there. So I'm going to sort of shortcut that bit a little bit. Finally, for the camera, I found I had this, and this is what I actually used on this quad for a while. On the KK2, there was this option where as you sort of leant forwards, you could put a servo thing in to try and keep it central. For me, I thought, you know what, I'll keep this here just because. And I think this runs off 12 volts, let's hope so. Because that's what you want. You want everything to run off the same voltage that you're putting in, so you don't need any power distribution or anything. But I could connect this directly to the receiver, and therefore I can move this around if I want to. This, I think, was a more up-to-date camera. I started off with the most horrible cameras you could find, and then this thing came out. This was the PZ0420, which was this Sony CCD sensor, which was so much better than all the CMOS sensors at the time. Nowadays, CMOS has come good, and we get much, much better high-quality stuff. But this was the bee's knees back in the day, having a PZ0420, because basically it worked much better in different light situations. So I'll try and put this on. Anyway, that's all the stuff. I'm now going to try and put it together. I think we're going to try and flash this first, see how that works, because I can't remember it all. But yeah, let's get building. In 2012 was 2 computers ago, but because I'd always just migrated my Macs, I still had the KK Flash tool available. Unfortunately, when I ran it, I got an error, which I thought, oh, that's weird. It's showing up as a 64-bit application. It should work. I found the website for the KK Flash tool, and one thing that mentioned is the software is written in Java, and Java's just supposed to run anywhere. And I just checked I had a version of Java running on this system, and it says yeah, so don't know why it won't run. Now, one of the hassles I've had with Mac OS, and although I like the Mac operating system, I do not like the way Apple does stuff, is I had to upgrade to Big Sur just to release my SIM on the App Store, because it wants the latest version of everything, and you can only do that by upgrading. So I've kept a virtual machine of the previous version I used, which was called Mojave, which still ran 32-bit applications. And when I tried running the KK Flash tool on this, fortunately it launches. Of course, the first question I'm faced with is which actual version of the board do I have, which took me a little while to figure out, until I found there was this bit that said the KK 5.5 black board, which is exactly the thing I have. The next problem, of course, is when we try and refresh the list of firmware for the particular board, there isn't any, probably because the website that they used to reside on is no longer there, and that's another problem. So how do we sort this one out? Okay, well, I went back to that Lazy Zero site, and he's got the firmwares on there, but it wasn't exactly obvious which one was mine. So then I went back and searched RC groups until I finally found Captain Cook's announcement of the quad controller software, where we could download a zip file directly. The then problem with that one is that I noticed there was an M48 and an M1681, but looking very closely at the chip, I seem to have the M168. So then I went back into my VM to, fortunately, you can say get the repository from a file. So I've pointed that at the hex file, and I've plugged in, ready to go. So let's try flashing this and see what happens. Well, it's doing something. So it's just done it. I guess that's it. Fortunately, in the meantime, I also found some instructions so I can tell how it works, and most importantly, the motor order, as I'm using the X. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Very different from Betaflight and stuff like that. So let's try and put it together now, see if it works. Well, this bit threw together pretty quickly, because so far no soldering involved, and I didn't think I ever used this at the start, but I noticed the mounting pattern would suit having standoffs there, so I've put some in. And this motor numbering, if you put it around this way, is the wrong way, but if you turn it upside down and face it that way, it's correct. So I might put that on the top plate. What I want to do here is just make sure that stuff works. I think what we've got is a bit going from here into there, which goes back out to the receiver. I need to make sure that works so I can try and bind the receiver, and that way I can test a motor. So first plug in of a battery, let's just see if lights come on and magic smoke comes out. That's cool, got an unbound receiver. So yeah, let's try binding that, and then I can try plugging a motor in and see what happens. Okay, quick update. I tried plugging a motor in, didn't seem to get anything to happen. Went back to the computer, noticed I flashed the M48 version instead of the other one, the M168. So reflashed that, and then still nothing working until I found out there is an arming sequence. It's the old that, and you see there's a little light that comes on there. If I disarm it, light goes out again. So like that, nothing happens, but you arm it and motor spins. So that's a good start. I need to figure out the motors. It's easy to reverse the motor direction in these. You just swap two of them over and that'll do it. So that's going to need to mount slightly weirdly upside down, and then I realise I don't really have access to get to those easily if I need to tune it. But yeah, let's try and put it vaguely together so I've got a bit more space and can think about what I'm doing. Now, as far as this VTX goes, I've just read the pinouts, and that seems to pass voltage out straight to there, and I think this will run off 12 volts. I kind of hope so. Something's going to go up in smoke here. And I thought I should just be able to plug this in to sort it out that way. And I found I've made, whoops. And I found I've made up one of these cables to kind of branch power out. So I'm going to plug this in. And let's see if anything explodes. And then we'll see if we can get a picture or something. Okay, so ready for the explosion. Fingers crossed it doesn't explode. Alright, we've got a light on. That's not exploded so far. So let's do a search. Oh, so we've got a dodgy connection somewhere. Ah, it works. We've got some dodgy pins, but look, we've got a picture. I think we've got a bad connector here. So, oh yeah, look. I'd tell you what it is. I can see it from here. Oh man, that's awful. Have a look if you can. It's just going to focus for me. We've just got like bits of bare metal hanging out of these. So let's see if we can tidy that up a bit. But yeah, that seems to work. That means no power distribution needed. And I'm just going to plug this whole thing in. And it should, in theory, work, which is weird. Allegedly, to calibrate the ESCs, we have to, something I used to do for a camera lens, minimise yaw, turn on, throttle up, power on, not the beeps I expect, if I'm honest. Throttle down. Nothing much changed. I had the feeling the throttle calibration on that particular ESC thing's different, but I can't remember what. So, checking motors. That needs reversing. That one's okay. That needs reversing. That needs reversing. Most of them need reversing. Well, I've just been scratching my head over this because I was testing it out, and of course I was doing the other thing about if you do that and if you go upwards on elevator, then we should get speed up there and there, and if you go left, that means we get speed up daily bronze, and it wasn't working. And it was originally labelled 1, 2, 3, 4, but I went back to really read the release notes, and it's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, which is a bit of a problem because this thing, however way I orientate it, I've got a crossover thing here, so I might need to, let me just disarm that, just create a little extension for these because I can't redo the motors. we're skipping ahead somewhat. This is the finished item, in theory, and I was struggling with the calibration of the ESCs. I found this thing. This is something that allowed us to plug in all the ESCs together and calibrate directly through the radio without thinking about the flight controller. So I did that, and that seemed to work fine. Plugged it back into the KK board, and then the KK beeped, or the ESC beeped, basically saying that we weren't at 0 throttle, and it was having a right panic about it. So I finally messed around more with the yaw. It said in the instructions you had to minimise the yaw pot, put throttle up, and it would beep, and then you put throttle down. I found that either it's max yaw or the turning's different than you'd expect on the pot. But those are now calibrated through the KK board. A few little changes. The KK, because it said try and isolate it from vibrations, is now on some mounting tape. Kind of had to do that because the ESC up here kind of gets in the way. We did rearrange the motor signal wiring so we didn't have to do anything like create extensions, and they're all sort of clipped in along here. These are on 10-inch props. I found I had three lots of 9-inch props, but I didn't have a fourth one, which is a pain. I thought I'd stick a GoPro 2 on because that was, you know, this sort of era, and I was a bit struggling about putting the battery there because the ESC was in the way, and I thought, oh, if I put the GoPro there, then the battery kind of... Hello, puppy. The battery kind of balances out a little bit. And I found over here an old, presumably this is a circular polarized antenna for RPSMA, and these are the slightly smaller antennas for the free sky. And what we got in terms of finding out if our battery voltage is fine is this little alarm here, which is something I actually use. So if I quickly go ahead and plug that in. So I've got on the potentiometer the ability to turn that, and then the rest of the controls are as expected. What I haven't got is easy access to the potentiometers in case I need to tune anything, and I'm not sure if this battery is going to be big enough. This is a 2650 mAh 3S, might go something bigger, but I've yet to try this, and it's all a bit funny because it's so flexible. But I thought I'd try hover in the garden, see what we get, because there's a potential day to fly coming up tomorrow which might work okay. This was almost a solder-free build, apart from that dodgy bit of cabling at the camera there, which I had to redo, and that's now good, and you can see what happens if we move the camera up and down, filming itself there. So that's all good. It does mean that I haven't really got redemption from doing a really messy build previously, but it's not too bad. But it's not, you know, fantastic. But it's of the era, so let's try and see if this thing actually hovers in the garden now. Okay, so the question here is, well, if it's going to be horribly and wobbly, or will I actually, you know, try and fly? Let's find out. I can't remember which way to arm it. Is it that way or the other way? No, try the other way. That way. Okay, let's try this out. Oh, that did not look good. So the props are spinning the right way. So I think I need to reverse the yaw gyro, but before I do this, I've noticed that the pot's min is where max is. So I should be able to actually reverse the pots back to normal by setting roll to min, which on this feels like max. And it says that the KK board should flash 10 times. Mine only flashes 3, but I haven't tried this, but let's try anyway. And then after we do that, 1, 2, 3 things, if I raise the throttle all the way up, and then we get a rapid flash. I don't know if that means it's done it, or it means it's just reversed the throttle. Who knows? Let's turn it off. Let's put that halfway. Let's see what happens. See if we can arm. Okay, that seems normal. So now let's try try setting that to min. All the way down. And what I should be able to do, hopefully it's going to flash 3 times. Cool. And if I move the yaw, that means it's reversed the yaw. So that should be good. And then move this back to normal. And try again. Okay, we've got the yaw gyro reversed. So arming, and let's see what happens now. Whoa. It's a little bit wobbly. I think that's on the roll. It feels like it slightly wants to yaw to the right. I'm trying to work out if that's roll or pitch. Yeah, it's definitely a little bit of trim needed, which sounds slightly bizarre. So I'm just going to put a bit of yaw trim. Well, I've just noticed my we're on 2.9. I don't think this beeper's working. Okay, we've got a start there. It feels like it needs some tuning. I've got to see if there's a way I can get a screwdriver in and mess with the gains without having to take it apart. If I can do that, I can try and fly it FPV and see what happens. I think it's worth it. I mean, it works, kind of. Hello, welcome to the field. Well, I won't lie to you, it's absolutely freezing out here. It's really unpleasant. I can keep warming my body. It's the fingers. You have to keep bare fingers to be on the radio, and just the tips of my fingers are already freezing. Anyway, we're going to try this guy. I lowered the gain a bit. I call them gains. They actually changed in version 4.7, so a sort of PID loop was implemented. So the roll is the P of the roll and pitch, and the next pot over is the I gain, and the yaw is something to do with yaw. Anyway, I lowered that down, see if it gets rid of that shaking. But I'm going to go straight to FPV, and we'll try giving it a go, see what happens. Normally I'd give stick cam at this rate, but it's too cold. I just want to like fly it and get going. I bought a couple of different batteries. I'm going to start with these 2.65 free cells. I'm not sure how long that will last. I bought a 5,000 with me as well to see how that goes. But we'll start with this, see how it goes. Yeah, that Boss Cam actually records audio, and that's what it sounds like. And it's not particularly nice audio because it's pretty much sat underneath these giant props. But, well, it does stuff. And the first thing I noticed on this one is, like I said, I tuned down the P gain a bit because it seemed to be oscillating. But it seems worse. Although it's windy out here. It's not huge amounts of wind, sort of 10 mile an hour, kind of a little bit gusty, and it was kind of protected in the garden, so I wasn't sure if this was a case of me lowering it too much or it's just being affected by the wind or something. That said, it was flyable. It was just, you know, not very pleasant, and to be fair, it's reacting absolutely fine. When I took the tricopter out, I would say the tricopter flew smoothly, but it was a bit fudgy. Especially trying to get like the yaw going. This thing seems to react. It reacts quite slowly. It's a big quad. It reacts nice and slowly to inputs, but it's absolutely fine. Another surprise to me is how good I thought the PZO420 sensor was at the time. And this is with the sun behind me, and it looks okay. Obviously, there's a lot of vibration, so it's not a particularly clear picture. But if I turn it around into kind of the sort of darker area that it is now, where the sun's in front of me, it doesn't do that good a job. I'm trying to think, like, was there a case of having to go in and turn WDR on? I think there was a board for it, and perhaps that's not on, but yeah, I'm not super impressed with how it is. I mean, this might have been much better than the other cameras back in the day, but it looks pretty crappy now, I have to admit. Anyway, I'm just flying this around, and if you're wondering what happened to the GoPro footage, well, we've got some, and it looks like this. And it's actually an angle I don't mind. I kind of wanted to see part of the frame and the props so I could sort of see the quad in context. Unfortunately, we've got a bunch of water over this because that field is wet. As I took off, we hit a load of grass, and we got a load of water splashed up. Unfortunately, I don't have a complete recording with this camera. Well, I do, but what happened is during the flight, you can see the amount of vibrations. Over time, the vibrations caused the GoPro to start slipping down in its mount. So now we've got a great view of the onboard camera, but as time goes on and the vibrations continue, all we have is more and more of the camera, and eventually we're just left with this, which isn't the greatest view in the world. So I did manage to fly it low under this sort of outcrop of trees, which is not very exciting, and it feels like you have to really concentrate. And at one point I even went up and took one of my hands off the control so I could twist the potentiometer just to see the servo look down very slightly and then look straight back up again, because it was too frightening not to have my fingers on the sticks at all times. So I have to say, in terms of like the receiver working and the VTX working and even the quad flying, it all worked. As I said, the quad doesn't fly particularly well. I immediately was thinking, you know what, we need to bring this in and we need to do some tunes on the gains. I found a way I could just kind of jam a screwdriver in there and get a slight angle and twist it a bit. But ultimately I was mostly kind of thinking, you know what, I'm kind of ready just to stop and not do any more. Out of the 2650, I got about a 5-minute flight until I started hearing the battery alarm starting to beep. I'd gone back home, and it was a bit dodgy, this little LiPo alarm. It sometimes came up saying I'm an 8 cell, and then it would not find the other 5 cells, and other times I'd plug it in and it would be okay, and I'd set the voltage alarm and that would work correctly, and I'd set it at sort of 3.3 volts because I didn't particularly care about taking that good a care of the batteries. I was a little bit concerned about landing this thing because the landing mat was close to me and I didn't want to take myself out with it, and it's not something you can be too accurate with when it's flying this wobbly. Interesting, my brother-in-law, Graham the farmer, was just coming up asking me if I could fly over another field to scare some geese off. I was going to stop at this flight, but I thought, well, we'll do one more flight. So this is the sort of bigger field where you may see me fly across, and newly planted barley, which is why Graham wanted me to try and scare away the geese, else he has to come out with a gun and a dog and start shooting at them and stuff. So I'd just taken off and immediately I got a beeper going off. I just put on the 5000 mAh 3S and I thought, oh, maybe this battery's dodgy, so I thought I'd better bring it in. It turned out that that little LiPo alarm once again was just going crazy and thought I had an 8S plugged in, so had started beeping constantly, as you can just hear here. So with the beeper finally fixed and working, we're off again, going to scare away the geese. And to be fair, the geese, give them their due, I didn't have to get anywhere close to them before they were like, what on earth is that horrendous noise coming at us? I have to say, it looks even more shaky in this field where we got a little bit more of a shake there. And this is where this becomes the final flight of this quad, because you will start to notice the VTX looking a little bit dodgy. It looks like some interference lines to start with. Those are the geese disappearing. And as I go a bit further, I wasn't thinking anything of it, and then it's like, oh, this doesn't look good, this looks worse. I was trying to turn it round a bit and nothing was happening, and I thought, you know what, let's just ditch it. Here's that same flight in the GoPro, which I was interested to see exactly what happened. When I got that sort of loss, it was clear it wasn't going to come back. This was like something has failed. So I thought, rather than try and guess where it is, because it was too far away to see, I knew if I ditched it, it would at least be in the same field, and I knew roughly where I was in the field. So I took the decision just to take the throttle off and let it go down. So this isn't going to look pretty, because I thought, you know, am I going to be flat or am I going to go sort of nose in or what? And the answer to that was about 45 degrees, and smack, there you go. Which meant I had a very long walk in a very muddy field to try and find this thing again. Okay. Here's this guy. Our big problem now is, where the hell's my GoPro? That's bad. I need to find that. I mean, it's only a GoPro 2, but it's still my GoPro. Yeah, not good. Let's see what we can find. Okay, good news. Looks like I found the impact zone, because we have here. Wow. Come on, you can come out. That's where it went in. That is a bit of. That's the gyro off the KK. Bit of prop. GoPro. Still recording. Good lad. More bits of props. So if there's a problem with 10-year-old tech, it's that it might not work that well, and it might. Well, it didn't fall out of the sky. I ditched it, but the VTX didn't hold up, and it kind of fell down and died. Like that, which is a bit of a shame. But hey, I got the bits back. That's the main thing. I'm covered in mud because this is a muddy field, and I'm going to go back home and warm up and try not to think about it for another 10 years or so. Back into the warm now, and we can get the full damage of this thing. What we've got here is 2 broken arms. It's good. It's like it's trying to fold backwards or form a supersonic shape. But yeah, the bits where the screws connect here both broke out. I don't think the servo's going to be broken. I'm feeling it, and I can't feel the strip gear there. I haven't tested the camera. I think it's fair that the little tilt mechanism is broken. Camera's probably okay. And the gyro, although popped off, has gone in such a clean way that I can probably repair that board should I want to. But the rest of it, you know, aside from the props, obviously broke off, half broke off, and this one survived, are okay. And this feels very much like how it used to be 10 years ago. Whenever I used to go out flying, I might have done a battery or two, and then I'd crash and break something. And I've kind of joked before about, like, you know, you young people don't know how lucky you've got it now. And I think the actual big difference here is not the fact that it was hard back then. It's kind of the fact that the order that stuff happened. These days, stuff generally works. You plug it in the first time. If it doesn't like burst into flames there and then, it's probably going to fly, and it's probably going to fly okay. Unless, you know, you've tried to put a gazillion amps through it and the ESCs are blown. Generally things fly along and they're absolutely fine until you crash them, and when you crash them you might have a failure. Back then it was more a case, because we're not trying to do weird things. We've got these big quads with it sort of moving around like this. We're just trying to fly them, and it was then the case of something would fail and then you'd crash because of it. In this case, I think what happened, and it's always a little bit tricky to tell after the event, because of course after you've crashed things explode out in a field or get buried in the mud. What looks like it happened is, I noticed when I found it I did not have that antenna anymore, and obviously we were getting a lot of vibrations there, and I was wondering if that just span off completely. Now you're probably thinking, well, it probably came off in the crash, but I've had plenty of crashes where I've hit the antenna and basically it's ripped off the entire SMA connector, and that's gone off absolutely completely. So I think what's happened with that loss, which was just instant, it's gone, it's not coming back, is the antenna fell off and we had no video and we ditched it down, and then everything broke. That's okay. It's like you say, it's how things were 10 years ago. I used to go out, crash sometimes, try and fix up the problems, try and mitigate the problems happening again, and then go back and do it some more until it started working better. But there you go, that's my 10-year-old quad flying using the original KK board, which is a little bit the worse for wear, but still good. And the only thing I wish I did different is take a thumbnail image of the quad before I flew it and then crashed it and smashed it up. I'll have to think about what to put on the start of this video at some point. Anyway, that's all my 10-year anniversary videos for now. I hope you had fun with it. I had a lot of fun building it, flying it, and ultimately crashing it, believe it or not. Because it was a little adventure and something a little bit different and fun to do. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed that, and I will catch you next video. Bye for now.
Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.